Good afternoon, YouTube. Today we're here to discuss retro rifles, or the retro rifle market in the US. Right? Are they cringe? Are they becoming cringe? Are they cool? Should you get one? Should you get into the space? Do I enjoy them? And what is a retro rifle? That's the biggest question, right? We're going to be answering all those questions today, so stay with me. All right, so the first question is, what exactly is a retro rifle, right? We hear this thrown around a lot today. What I'm holding in my hands, I would say, is quasi-retro, right? We do have a period-correct M68, probably from the early 2000s. We have a Vietnam-era Colt M16 magazine, but we also have reproduction front handguards and a Yankee Hill flash hider. We do have a front sight base, but this certainly wasn't made a long time ago. And we have a pistol brace, something they didn't exactly have in the 80s and 90s. So I would say, to be a retro rifle, the rifle either had to exist or be a copy of a gun that existed from the mid-50s up into the early 2000s, right? It has to be a weapon that is no longer in service, or at least not in service in this configuration, right? Obviously, the military still uses short ARs. The Mark 18 with its 10.3 barrel is pretty similar to this, so I wouldn't call a Mark 18, or at least a Mark 18 Mod 1 or 2, a retro rifle. But the Mark 18 Mod 0 is fairly out of service, right? I think if you have a rifle with a quad rail and a front post, it's not really a retro rifle because, I still carry an M4 with a 14.5 and a front sight post and a quad rail every day at work, right? I would say that the Colt waffle stocks also cannot be an example of a retro rifle because they're still in service. This gets interesting when you talk about kind of the big three, right? ARs, AKs, and I would say MP5s. An MP5 with a quad rail, to me, is not a retro rifle. But an MP5, we'll put an example here, with the triangle front handguard and an A2 or A3 stock, I would say is retro, and the brace definitely takes point off. Mini 14 is another great example, right? On my Mini 14, I have an original production Birch stock, right? That's pretty retro. This gun was produced in 1997. It's a Ruger Ranch rifle, stainless steel. In a previous video, I said it was aluminum. I got a lot of hate on the Ruger forum. It is steel. Sources have said aluminum alloy with steel, but we'll call it, certainly the barrel and receiver are steel, right? Stainless steel, but no threading on the barrel. That gives you retro points. I have a 1x4 on here. It's a 1.5x4. That takes points off, in my opinion. I think adding a modern optic, right here I'll have a picture of my AUG, not retro. Despite the fact that it takes the original waffle mags, right? And the 16-inch barreled AUG's been on the market for a long time. It's also still in military use in this configuration. Therefore, not part of the retro market, especially with the optic I have on it, not original. Whereas this is quite close to OEM. All right, this here is probably the most retro of all the rifles I own. This is an M1A. Running the serial number, this was produced in early 2003, right at the end of the GI parts kits. So a lot of stuff in here is military contract, the receiver obviously for the civilian market. I've got a late 60s, early 70s wood stock on there, government proof mark, original weapon number. Down here, 137 is where this sat on the rack. Original folding butt pad with cleaning kit. So this, I would consider a retro rifle, right? This is a weapon that existed in this form between the 1950s and the early 2000s. It's not in service anymore, and everything on it is as original as can be, right? This M16 is also quite close to being retro, in my opinion. I have a new production barrel, but it's a new production Delton barrel that runs almost identical to the old barrels, right? So 1 in 9 twist, which is a little bit goofy. It's not a 1 in 12 like the original M16s, but we have an original birdcage flash hider. We have the front sight post. We have a flat top, which obviously they didn't have until the M16 A4. But the EOTech has been around since the late 90s. So I could consider this a retro rifle, in my opinion. Original 60s production trapdoor stock, original production magazine, standard lower, standard upper, right? As a general rule of thumb, anything that you would have seen in the first or second Black Ops games, except for the future weapons in Black Ops 2, Anything from the Black Ops 2 campaign or from the original Black Ops campaign is likely what you would consider a retro rifle today, right? So as far as a pros and cons list goes on retro rifles, I have three main examples, right, that I'm going to talk about today. First off is going to be either a short or up to a 20-inch AR with retro furniture. This one's going to be controversial, right? The AR has been in service for a long time, right? The Air Force started testing it in 1967, and it's been in service ever since. So some people might say, well, this isn't very retro, right? And this is an electronic aiming device. But I was born in 2002, and these existed, 5 years before I existed. So I would consider everything on here retro, right? Some people are hardliners and they say, oh, you need a 20-round magazine to be a retro gun. But these were first put into service in, I believe, 1969, which last time I checked, 1969 is a long time before most of the people watching this video probably existed. So we're gonna call 30-round aluminum USGI Standig mags retro, right? Another thing, I have a brace. The brace didn't exist during the Cold War, but due to the ATF, we're not allowed to have stocks on short rifles like this, handguns, if you will. So this is just an example of what I'm going to be using for pros and cons. I also have a Ban era AK, right? Some people might argue, well, 1999 isn't that long ago. I would say 99, no threads, all wood furniture, all steel construction. It's considered a retro gun, right? It's short, it's compact. That's a lot of what you're looking at in a retro gun. And then finally, I have my AP5P. Again, this is a Cold War production G3 trigger housing, but it's a modern produced rifle or handgun, subgun, with a newer production front handguard. That's a reproduction of the old style. It also has a collapsible brace instead of an A3 or A2 stock. But for reference, we're gonna call this retro, right? So I think the thing that really makes these guns cool, it's two things really. So first off is they look super badass, right? If you ever played Black Ops 1, I'm gonna reference Black Ops 1 probably more than once in this video, right? Super cool game, super formative part of probably my outlook on gun culture, right? Black Hawk Down, super cool movie. Everybody talks about that and they're like, oh, I want my Car 15 to look like Black Hawk Down, right? Any kind of cool movies from the 80s and 90s, right? There's just a lot of cool pop culture tied to this style of like Car 15, Commando, AR, right? So that's a big part of it. You want a gun that looks cool, because when it looks cool, it's just, who wants to have something hanging on their wall that doesn't look cool, right? That's why I don't use the SP Tactical braces. They look redonkulous to me. I'm gonna use something I think looks cool. I'm gonna perform better with that, right? Same thing with the AK. This is the bad guy gun, right? That is very cool for a long time. All wood furniture. This is the terrorist weapon. This is the Russian army, right? This is Red Dawn. This is what the bad guys use. And what you also end up with is you don't have a ton of attachments on here. So these are just super like handy weapons to have around, right? I think today we have quad rails and we have M-LOK, and you have people who have a laser light device, laser aiming module, right? You have a flashlight on the side. You're gonna have a freaking foregrip. You're gonna have a pressure pad. You're gonna have wires. You're gonna have tape. You're gonna have an optic. You're gonna have maybe a riser, maybe a flip up magnifier, right? And then you're gonna have a muzzle device out front. And that ends up with a very, very heavy rifle, often an unbalanced rifle, maybe a more practical rifle for fighting wars. But when I go to the range with my friends, I'm not always fighting a war, right? If I go to fight a war, I'm bringing an FN produced M4A1, right? I have it in an armory at work. That's what's coming with me. These guns here are mostly for dinking off at the range and just to be a cool part of history, right? 90% of my gun collection isn't for fighting Russian paratroopers. So if you're not fighting Russian paratroopers, having a light, handy, cool looking gun you can go shoot with your buddies is super cool, right? I have some small modifications on here to make it a little more usable. I like red dots. I don't have the best vision in the world, so having a red dot's handy. And I also have a more modern muzzle device because I shoot almost always suppressed, right? With the suppressor, this is still only an 18-inch gun, right? Not bad. Super handy, pretty quiet, hearing-ish safe, pretty reliable. 30 caliber can doesn't add too much back pressure, and it just makes for a super fun gun. Also makes for a great truck gun, right? You can leave this in your back seat. It's not gonna snag on stuff. It's streamlined, there's not much to it, right? Safe and fire, comfortable to shoot, and overall, super fun little package, in my opinion. All right, now that we've talked about the pros, it's time to talk about the cons of retro rifles, right? And I think that the biggest con, right, is cost anymore, cost and elitism. I think that it is a super cool space when it is a space of cheap firearms being flooded into the market, especially like surplus firearms being collected by people who just love the history associated with them, right? But when it stops being surplus and history and it starts being expensive reproductions and like this elitist mindset, when I was building my M16, kind of A1 M16 deal that I built up, I noticed it is getting very hard to get carry handle uppers, right? 10 years ago, this is something that you couldn't throw in the garbage, right? Nobody wanted these. Now they're getting rare, and I personally don't really like carry handles. I think they look cool. I also think mounting something on them makes it retarded to shoot through, makes it super uncomfortable, but it's hard to less than 150, 200 bucks find a decent stripped A1 or A2 upper, right? And now you're spending another 50 or 60 bucks in a parts kit to throw everything in here, right? And that's insane, right? Brownells, I love Brownells. I think they make some of the best gunsmithing equipment. I have some of their wrenches, their screwdriver sets. Brownells, fantastic gunsmithing supplies, but paying $2,000 for a rifle I can't even mount an optic on with a fixed stock and a 20-inch barrel is just a little bit insane, right? And it to me takes it away a lot. Now you're not attracting the people who are in it for the history. You're getting this new crowd of elitist, I don't want to say weirdos. I'm not trying to shit on everyone who likes their like boutique, handmade Vietnam repro, but it's just, it cheapens the experience when the guns become expensive and only to be acquired by the top, right? You get like a lot of people in forums and they're gonna like shit on stuff. They're like, oh, you think that's an M16 A1, but that's the XM16 E2 front fucking flash hider on there, right? And it's like, well, at the end of the day, I built this to have fun with my buddies, not to be critiqued by some weirdo online, right? So that is the bad, and also, I mean, you lose a lot of real estate, right? When I pulled the tri-rail off here, now I just can't really have a flashlight unless I want like something retarded, right? I'm not mounting a little Surefire flashlight on here, right? I no longer have a red dot without that rail space. You do lose a lot of like practicality when you go back to a retro styling. For me, I think it's worth it, but if you're a competition shooter, it is just harder to optimize these older rifles, right? Like those clamshell front handguards, I'm not putting a light on that little AR that I have out there that I was showing earlier. Eventually, I might put a quad rail. I got a quad rail right here. I might throw on there, right? Maybe in a month or two, I'll pick up a Streamlight on sale somewhere, throw it on there, throw on the quad rail. But as it sits now, it's just hard to optimize that. I'm not going to shoot it with night vision, like ever. I'm not throwing a freaking PEC 16 on this little retro gun. Also, you can only reach so far out there with an 11.5. But yeah, the fan base, the modern fan base of the retro community is, in my opinion, maybe the worst part of retro firearms, right? My 2 cents. All right, guys. So in conclusion, if you want a lightweight, fun rifle with some history behind it, get into the retro space. And if you want to put lights on your guns and you want to use them in a more tactical space, maybe don't, but definitely consider them as a second or third purchase. Maybe not the first gun you get. Overall, I enjoy retro rifles, and I hope that they continue to be affordable, and I hope that people continue to be into them. Thanks for watching. Time for the outro. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I had sunglasses on for most of the video because it's sunny out, and I live in South Georgia, and it gets sunny. Also, I got kicked in the head at work a little bit. It turns out a 200-pound dude getting thrown at you during combatives training leaves a bruise, so I don't want to look too goofy. So that's the reason there. I hope you liked the video. If you are new to the retro scene, welcome to it. If you've been here for 40 years, thanks for, working the forums and keeping everybody updated. If you want to see anything in the future, leave a comment, right? I'm always looking for ideas. Empty bag of ideas I'm working with here. So if you want to give me some good ones. I want to do some rucking stuff in the future and more uniform reviews because those are something I use every day and something I could pass on to you, the viewer. So thanks for watching. Leave me a like, please.